So again, welcome everybody to the December edition of the Wisconsin Maple Hour. My name is Tony Johnson. I'm the Maple Syrup Project Manager for UW-Madison Division of Extension, and we're joined tonight by Jim Adamski, a sales consultant for CDL Wisconsin. Jim's joining us tonight to talk about getting ready for the 2020 sugaring season. And with that, I'm going to stop my screen share. I'm going to launch a quick poll and turn it over to Jim. So let me just make sure this is stopped. And then Jim, you can start your screen share and I will launch the poll. So again, if you got any questions, enter those in the chat and we will get to those at the end. Thank you all, and the floor is yours, Jim.
Okay, well, good evening, everyone. Like I say, for those of you that don't know me, I'm Jim Adamski. I have a small commercial sugaring operation up near Anido. Been a commercial syrup producer for, I think this is going to be my 40th spring coming up here. So been involved in the industry for a number of years, been with CDL Wisconsin, I think now for 11 years. We were independent CDL dealer prior to that. So grateful to be with you folks tonight, and please make sure that you chime in if you've got any questions. Make sure you put them into the chat. Please remember, there are no foolish questions. Ask away. We've got a relatively small group, so make sure you ask your questions. So alrighty, so the first thing I want to touch on is resources and information. So this last year, the North American Maple Syrup Council has released the third edition of the North American Maple Syrup Producers Manual. This manual can be downloaded on the internet for free by going to www.mapleresearch.org. It is a very sizable download. It is 434 pages. It is very good quality information, vetted by land-grant universities and researchers. So really, this thing is the kind of go-to reference for any maple questions that you may have. If you don't want to download this particular edition, you can buy it in multiple places online, or you can buy it from the Wisconsin Maple Producers Association. I believe the copies are selling for around $50 or $55, somewhere right in that neighborhood. And I know during the Winter Institute here in January, they will have plenty of copies that can be purchased at that event as well. So just a really good reference for everything to do with maple, from forest management, tree selection, processing maple syrup, packaging, to value-added maple products. So, okay, so we're going to kind of kick this off. What we should be doing this time of year to make sure that we are ready for the upcoming season. For most of us that start tapping early, the season's right around the corner. So, we're going to start a little bit with woods and tubing systems. We've had a lot of wind events late summer into just the last couple of weeks, as a matter of fact. So it doesn't hurt to get out there and check the tubing systems and the main lines and see if you've got any limbs or trees down over the top of any of your tubing systems. It's always nice to get out there and give it kind of a quick once over before we get any snow or ice, just to make sure we get everything up and it's not buried under several feet of snow. Great time of year also, to be checking those individual 5/16 lines and or your 3/16 line, depending on which type of tubing that you're using, to make sure that we've got any damage or any animal chews or any leaks repaired prior to season coming along. With the warm weather as of late, probably tomorrow and Saturday, perhaps you could even sneak in some last minute tubing sanitizing, if need be, especially if you're, running the 3/16 product. So with that, if I can get my computer to do what it's supposed to here, we're going to talk a little bit about sanitizers. So when we talk about some sanitizers in the maple industry of, sanitizing stuff prior to season start, really there's two go-to sanitizers that work very good. They're both a bleach solution. One is sodium hypochlorite. The other one is sodium. Well, there's sodium hypochlorite and calcium hypochlorite. The thing to remember when you're using bleach-based materials, if you're using the sodium-based product, the sodium hypochlorite will definitely attract animals. It'll attract your, attract your deer, attract your squirrels. So, if we are using a sodium-based sanitizer, we want to make sure that we are getting it washed off very thoroughly, that there's no residue left that will attract the animals. So when we're looking at sanitizers, especially bleach-based sanitizers, we want to make sure that that sanitizer is a food-grade material. So when we start talking about the calcium hypochlorite or the calcium-based bleaches, there are some products like this in the swimming pool world or the pool cleaning world, and we definitely want to shy away from those type of chemicals. We do not want to bring those over into the maple world. They're really not approved for food-grade use. So regarding bleaches, stay away from any scented products. As you know, maple syrup is notorious for picking up any odor that it comes in contact with. So, if we are using a scented bleach, there is a very good opportunity. If you can smell that scent will be picked up in your maple syrup. So the other thing is when using sanitizers, contact time is definitely the key. And the contact time is going to vary, depending on how dirty the material is that we are trying to sanitize. So contact times can be as little as 5 minutes for an item that, isn't heavily contaminated to, maybe upwards of an hour to get the correct contact time on something that is heavily contaminated. So kind of use your best judgment on how dirty the material is that you're sanitizing. Bleach is a very difficult product to wash off, so it will require a fairly high volume of water. Warm water is best, but if you don't have warm water, a high volume of water is going to be required to rinse that product off to make sure that we don't have any residue left on our surfaces. Concentration of bleach, roughly, we like to see that at about 200 parts per million. And I know we're going to get some questions on how do I determine, what or how do I come up with 200 parts per million? And unfortunately, I can't give you any really good mixing directions. Unfortunately, bleach comes in many concentrations. It'll come in 3%, 5%, 5.25%, 5.5%, 7%. So we have so many different concentrations. Unfortunately, I don't have a cookie cutter approach that I can give you the correct ratio to come up with the 200 parts per million. You're going to have to read the label of the material that you purchase. So like I say, that's just a little bit on sanitizers. That's two of them that are pretty commonly used in the maple industry. So if you have mechanical vacuum pumps and releasers, if you're running some high vacuum equipment, there's always a few things that we should look at this time of year before the weather gets cold. So, if we did not service that vacuum pump, that mechanical vacuum pump, whether it be a liquid ring or a rotary vane, if we didn't service that pump right after season was completed and get it into some fresh oil, we should definitely try and get that pump serviced before the cold weather is, approaching us. If there is any moisture in that oil, that moisture will freeze in the oil. If it's a rotary vane pump, this can freeze your vanes into position. So, on the first warm day that you have with that moisture in the oil, you go to start up that pump, it's going to cause that pump to not turn, and we can cause rotor damage and vane damage in those rotary vane pumps. So like I say, it's a good practice always, if right at the tail end of the season, if we can get that pump serviced and get it in fresh oil, otherwise definitely before the weather gets too cold, if we can get that pump sitting in fresh oil and make sure there's no moisture in that oil prior to winter, that is definitely the best case scenario. If you are using some smaller vacuum pumps, diaphragm pumps, whether it be a SureFlow pump, whether it be a guzzler style pump, this is a great time of year to check the diaphragms on those, and possibly, check them for cracks, possibly replace that diaphragm prior to season getting started. If you are using a rotary vane vacuum pump, this is a great time of year. If you did do an oil change on that pump, there is a screen, usually on either it's the AirTech and the CDL pumps. I can't speak for the other manufacturers, but usually there is a screen on the air inlet of these pumps located underneath the check valve. It will require you to remove a housing from that vacuum pump to get at that screen, but typically those screens get covered in sugar. And we want to make sure that screen is clean, that we're not restricting the airflow into that vacuum pump for the upcoming season. Clean and service mechanical releasers. So, it has been a push in the maple industry over the last number of years with better quality vacuum pumps. monitoring systems. We are taking our vacuum levels up higher all the time, chasing that yield goal of that half a pound of syrup per tap. So when we look at, the higher we take our vacuum levels in our system, the more moisture that we have in the air inside of that system. So the higher we go in vacuum, the more free moisture that we have inside of our system. So when we're looking at mechanical releasers, just as one part of the puzzle, we see a lot of sugar buildup from moisture inside the pistons, in the U-cups, on the O-rings, on the check valves. So it really is important to pull them mechanical releasers in, sometime before the next season. Disassemble the piston assemblies on these, clean them up, make sure we get any sugar that's in there out, make sure we get everything relubricated and reassembled, prior to season starting. Electric releasers, based on the amount of parts that we sell, there is a check valve that is located on the top of most of the electric releasers out there. And that check valve will not release, and sap will sit inside that check valve. So you have to manually push open that check valve to drain it. We sell a lot of these check valves on a yearly basis. So, and I'll be honest, I am guilty occasionally of not draining that check valve and having them crack. So that is also a good item to put on your to-do list while the weather's warm here over the next several days, to make sure that we've got that cleaned. Like I say, clean suction screens on electric releasers. So usually the pumps on the submersible pump electric releasers, we usually have screens on those pumps. Usually the last sap of the season is not what we necessarily call the most stellar sap. It's getting a little crummy by that time of year, and we get a little build up on our screens. So typically them screens are held onto the submersible pump releasers by a couple of screws. Simply remove the screws, clean the screens, and reinstall. Just a quick little tip. Otherwise, if things start to run in the spring and the releaser's pumping awful slow, we have some restriction on that screen, we might end up with some, setting a moisture trap on our vacuum system. So another good thing to check is check the floats and switches on your moisture trap. After you get the oil change in that vacuum pump, fire it up, with the moisture trap disassembled, flip the pen switch inside that moisture trap, make sure it is shutting off that vacuum pump, make sure that we didn't have something fail on that switch. Check our floats, make sure that we don't have any pinholes or any liquid in any of our floats. So like I say, just a few things to check over on vacuum pumps and releasers. Evaporators. You can't believe the amount of calls that we get in February, and we'll have a customer tell us that, jeepers, I got a hole burnt through my base stack, or I've got a hole burnt through on my stack, and I gotta have one of these in a hurry. Right now lead times on maple equipment are shorter than they were last year at this time, but it's still quite a stretch to get some of this stuff. So it's a good time of year to get out and check the stacks, especially if you have a wood-fired evaporator. Make sure that we've got nothing burned through. If you need a replacement base stack or you need replacement stack, now is the time to get it ordered so that we get it in time for season. Great time, to check your arch rail gaskets, the gaskets in which your pans sit on. If you're running some high efficiency wood-fired arches and you have gaskets in between your pans on these positive pressure arches, it's a great time to check the insulation on our pan dividers and different things. Also great, insulation inside of the evaporators. Great time to check float box gaskets. And I'll be honest, right now, it's not a bad time of year to go out to the sugar house while the weather's warm. If it's not heated, get that evaporator assembled. Make sure that you have all the parts. Make sure that you have nothing missing. We get a lot of calls. It seems like in the 11th hour, somebody misplaced their float box for their evaporator. They can't seem to find it, and they need one yesterday so that they can get out there and get their sap boiled. So like I say, it doesn't hurt to get after some of those projects a little bit earlier, and make sure that we get them taken care of now. For those of you that run oil-fired evaporators, it's a great time. If you can't remember the last time that you put burner nozzles in your oil evaporator, it's probably time to replace them. And then at that stage of the game, if you can't also remember when you replaced your fuel filter last for that particular evaporator, it's probably time for a fuel filter. So to take that one step further, if you are putting in new burner nozzles, it doesn't hurt to, maybe have a burner technician come out, clean that burner up just a little bit, do a combustion check on it, an efficiency check, just to make sure that evaporator is burning clean. Fuel oil is expensive. We want to make sure that we're getting all the heat out of it that we possibly can. So if you're looking for someone to do, oil burner service, I know over the years we have trained the crew at stainless specialists based out of Brokaw to take care of the oil evaporators on this side of the state for us. And then we have Barton Gale Mechanical that we've trained their service techs over there as well to service the oil evaporators on the western side of the state and pushing into Minnesota. Okay, reverse osmosis machines. This is just something you check. We want to make sure we got our membranes out. We got them someplace where they're not going to freeze. This is a great time of year to get your membranes in if they need to be cleaned. So many times we'll get people that wait till the 11th hour or the last minute, they'll all of a sudden in the middle of February, it's like, hey, we got to get these membranes cleaned. Well, usually in the middle of February, if you're making the determination that you want to get your membranes cleaned, you're not the only one. So I'm just going to tell you right now, this time of year, we are fairly busy cleaning membranes over at Cadott, but the closer we get towards season, the busier it does get. So if you want a quicker turnaround time on your membranes, if they need to be cleaned, try to get them in now and get them cleaned up prior to the season or the rush of people bringing them in kind of at the last minute. We want to make sure you have your consumables, soaps, filters, acid, whatever the case may be. Make sure you got enough material on hand to run that whole season. Calibration packets for pH meters and different things. And we're gonna touch on pH meters here in a little bit farther down in this presentation. So we're not gonna cover too much on it right now. Taps. So replacing taps is really common in the tubing world. There's been quite a bit of research done the last couple of years on early deployment of taps. And they have found that we are not seeing any real reduction in yield by putting our taps on this time of year heading into this next season. So we started putting new taps on at our facility here last week, and hopefully by this weekend we'll have all those put on, so we're ready to go for spring. As long as our weather is relatively cool, it's kind of a fluke that we're getting some warm weather this time of year, but we really don't see a lot of microbial contamination or microbial growth. When our temperature is under 40 degrees, we don't really see a lot of growth. It's when our temperatures get above 50 degrees that we see that microbial contamination kind of explode. So like I say, getting them on early is not really showing any real big reduction in yield. For those of you that aren't replacing your taps on tubing systems, new taps will yield you about a 17% increase in sap production, compared to a used tap. So like I say, once again, if you are using cast aluminum taps or stainless taps for buckets, of course you can't replace them on an annual basis. They are, a little more expensive than that. Tubing taps are about a quarter a piece. They're not, $3 like a stainless steel tap is. So, at that stage of the game, at least if you're not going to replace them or if you're running those type of taps, make sure we're sanitizing. Let's get that tap sanitized. Let's get it clean. So when we drill that tap hole into that tree, we're putting in that clean tap, and that, that tree doesn't really want to trigger the healing process because we don't have any contamination there. So like I said, we talked about sanitizers earlier on, like say calcium hypochlorite, sodium hypochlorite, whatever we do, we want to make sure that we have enough contact time to kill the contamination that's on there, and that we have enough of a hot water rinse or enough of a water rinse that we take care of any residue that we might have left on that equipment after that sanitizing process has taken place. Bag holders and buckets. Buckets, like say, should be sanitized before use. If you sanitized them at the end of season last year, made sure they were 100% dry before they were put away, stored them in a clean place. When you take that bucket apart, if I don't smell any odor or anything like that in there, you should be fine. If the buckets were put away wet and you do pick up that moldy or that mildewy smell in them buckets, when you're unpacking them before tapping, we should definitely try to get them sanitized before season. because like I say, if you're smelling a moldy or a mildew smell, we definitely got some problems going on there. So sap bags should be replaced on an annual basis. We do get some thrifty sugar makers that try to reuse sap bags. It's virtually impossible to get them clean, even harder to get them dry. So like I say, they're a relatively small cost. Make sure them are replaced on an annual basis. And say just make sure you have enough bags on hand for any critters or storm damage that occurs during season. Make sure you got enough spare bags. Tapping bits and tapping hammers, we're just going to kind of touch on them just a little bit. We're going to go into more detail in the February clinic regarding the tapping bits and the tapping hammers. Tapping bits are generally good for around 2,000 holes. So if you're a hobbyist, they're going to last for a good number of years. We can tell at our place when we're tapping, we get about 2,000 holes on a bit, and we're dragging our batteries down, and the amount of battery or the amount of taps that we can get on that drill battery definitely starts to go down as that bit decreases in sharpness. Tapping hammers, make sure that when we're tapping trees, we're tapping taps, we're setting taps. We're not driving spikes. We want to make sure we didn't grab the 32-ounce Eastwing framing hammer out of the garage to go out and put our taps in the trees. So, like I say, we'll discuss more of the ins and outs in February on that one during the tapping clinic. So, measuring devices. This is probably one of the biggest things that we see in the maple world. All of a sudden, we'll have a customer that shows up with barrels of thin syrup. They'll have a hydrometer that went south on them. They will have bought a new refractometer and they will not have calibrated it. So, a lot of the problems that we see is failure to calibrate a lot of our measuring devices, whether, it's a thermometer that should have been boiled, in boiling water to find the boiling point at your location on that day, whether it's a refractometer, so the biggest thing with a refractometer, there's a picture of the refractometer. It's kind of the upper picture with the ATC on it. That's going to be an automatic temperature correcting refractometer. We want to make sure you got a calibration solution for that. Underneath that little black bump there above where it says ATC, you remove that rubber cap. There is an adjusting screw there so that if you have a known calibration solution, say for example, if you have a calibration solution that's 60 bricks, put that on the glass, close the lens, and then you can set that refractometer to read what the calibration solution is set for. So it is really imperative that we get those calibrated. Once a year is definitely helpful. If it's brand new, definitely want to make sure we get it calibrated. If you're using a sap refractometer, we can use distilled water as a calibration solution for the sap refractometers, and I believe also for the electronic MISCO refractometer that measures sap all the way up through syrup. We use distilled water on that one as a calibration solution. And we're going to talk a little bit about calibration packets for pH meters. So for those of you that are using an RO machine and you have a pH meter to measure the pH of your wash water to make sure that we are getting that membrane cleaned, one of the biggest mistakes that we see from producers is they'll buy a pH meter and they'll never calibrate it. So it is not uncommon, that these devices can be 2 or 3 points off. So you think that you're washing your RO machine at a pH of 12 and you're actually only maybe washing it at a pH of 9 or 10, and we're really not getting that membrane clean. The things can kind of go the other direction. You may think you're washing at 12 and then all of a sudden you may be washing it at 13 or 14. And once we start getting above 12, we can start causing some membrane damage. So this is really one of those tools that we want to make sure we have it calibrated. Always try to start the season with a new set of batteries. I know that's one of the first things that I do pretty much every season before we get started is we put new batteries in the pH meters at our facility and make sure we get them calibrated, and we're usually good throughout the season. Measuring devices, like I said, hydrometers. These babies can get off on you. You want to inspect that hydrometer, make sure it is free of any cracks and can be easily read. If you're like me, you should definitely have a spare around. I seem to break quite a few of these throughout the course of the year for some reason. So if you have a hydrometer that you're using at your sugar house and you are coming to the Wisconsin Maple Syrup Producers Winter Institute in January, we will be offering a hydrometer testing clinic at that event. So if you bring your hydrometer in, it can get tested and can get certified that it is reading correctly. So that is just one of the things that's going to be going on at the Winter Institute for Wisconsin. So we're going to talk a little bit about the Winter Institute. Of course, the registration can be found on the Wisconsin Maple Syrup Producers website, which is going to be wismaple.org. So you can find the registration available there on the website. Looking a little closer at the agenda, Friday night, we are going to be doing some hydrometer testing on Friday night from 4 till 6. Starting at 5 o'clock, we're going to have a Maple 101, which is going to cover anywhere or anything from tree identification all the way through syrup bottling. And then we're going to take a little break, and then we're going to do a Maple 201 after that. Myself and Mark Iselhart will be the presenters. Mark Iselhart is a researcher from University of Vermont. So we will be doing these presentations. For the Maple 201, we're going to be taste testing off flavors of maple syrup that are created by nature. So we're going to have sour sap, sour syrup, sour sap syrup that was made with buddy sap. We're going to have buddy syrup, metabolized syrup, and then we also encourage producers that are going to attend that particular clinic to bring in an 8-ounce container of their own syrup. And we're not going to judge anyone's syrup, and we're not going to throw anybody under the bus, but we're going to blind taste test everybody's syrup that they brought in, so that you get used to the flavors of maple syrup that, are not necessarily your own. Years of judging maple syrup that I've had, you can definitely tell in the state of Wisconsin, maple syrup has different flavors from different production areas. So say, for example, syrup that's produced over on the eastern side of the state, Manitowoc, Door County, coming off the limestone, definitely has a little bit of a different flavor, than what we see in central Wisconsin coming off some of our silt loam soils. And, heading over to the western side of the state, when we get a little heavier soil and a little heavier hard pan, we see that syrup taking on just a subtle different flavor as well. So it's kind of a good experience to try everybody else's syrup and to become to a little more accustomed to just something other than just your own syrup. So we'll have a pretty good presentation set up for Saturday as well. We're going to have some updates from University Extension, of course, Tony Johnson. We're going to have a NAS update from Greg Bussler, and then we're going to have several clinics throughout the morning. I'm not going to run through them all. And then we'll have some breakout sessions in the afternoon with value-added maple products, RO technology. So, full agenda, the full program is available online. It is a pretty good event. It is a great information gathering session, a great chance to network with other producers. Sometimes the conversations that happen in the hallway are even better than the presentation. So, like I say, make sure you can attend that. That's a very good program. So, okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about filters and bulk storage. Make sure your filter bags are clean and odor-free. A lot of times what we see with filter bags is they'll get washed in hot water, they'll get put away, and they're not quite dry. And when we put that filter bag away, when it's got a little bit of moisture in it, we're going to pick up just a little bit of a mildew smell in that filter bag. So this may sound crazy, but I always say, give your filter bag the sniff test prior to use. Make sure that we don't have any mold or mildew smell, in that filter bag. If you are using filter bags, make sure you have plenty of pre-filters in stock that you can, run along with those filter bags. If you are running filter presses, filter papers, DE powder, drums for bulk syrup storage. It's gotten a little bit better on the drum aspect. Drums are a little bit quicker to get. During the last few years, they were kind of a little challenging on the drums and the availability. Make sure you got sample bottles alongside for your, knowing what's in your barrels for your kind of your receipts and what's in your barrels and what's going to be shipped. So bottles and labels. So make sure you got, bottles and labels prior to season getting here. Custom printed labels usually have a long lead time. They're getting a little bit better. If you are ordering new labels, please keep in mind that over the last couple years, our nutritional facts, our serving sizes, and our portions per container have changed with the new FDA labeling and guidelines. So if you are ordering new labels, please make sure that you have the correct serving sizes per container and the size of the serving has been updated. So just kind of keep that in mind. Best practices, really at the end of the day, this is a great time of year to make sure we get out and get that evaporator assembled. Go through early winter, make sure that you've got everything for it. If you need to order parts, there's still time. One thing that I found over the years that works good for me as a sugar maker is to keep a notebook in the sugar house. And every time I see something in the sugar house or in the woods that needs to be repaired, we kind of write it in that notebook as season is taking place, so that we can keep track of everything that we need to have covered or fixed before the next season. A lot of times what happens is, and we were guilty of it years ago, season is done. We get everything cleaned up, we get everything put away, we shut the door, everything is out of sight and out of mind, and all of a sudden, oh shoot, I forgot to fix this, or I forgot to order the parts for this, or so, like I say, kind of keep a log on what needs to be replaced. It's just, like I say, keep a notebook on the shelf in the sugar house, and every time you see something, just put a quick note in there and get out there this time of the year and refresh your memory of and make sure that you got everything taken care of that you need for the next season. Something else that we kind of do at our facility, it works pretty well, is we kind of have our January 1st checklist. So we know that we are a licensed facility for the state of Wisconsin. So we know we're going to have a safe water test. So usually right after the first of the year, in fact, right after New Year's Day, it's, get our water test taken, make sure we're getting it tested for nitrate and bacteria, so that we've got that, on file at our facility when our inspector comes in the spring, if the inspector comes in the spring, depending on where you are. It is also a great time of year to update your SDS, or it used to be called your MSDS forms. So any product that you're using at your sugar house, whether it's, RO soap, DE powder, pan cleaner, you want to make sure that you have a 3-ring binder in your sugar house with these SDS forms on file. I can share a not so fun story with you on the SDS file. So several years ago, I was working in our sugar house. I was cleaning a pan, and I decided to pour a little more pan acid in. Splashed it up, got the pan cleaner in my eye, tried to flush it out with water as best I could. It required a trip into the old emergency room. I grabbed my SDS file, I took it with me. And fortunately, there is treatment stuff in there, and they know what the chemical is, they know what the compound is, they know what the pH of it was, and they were able to treat it correctly and make sure that I didn't have any damage to my eyesight. So, as petty as it may sound, these forms can be very valuable to you in your sugar house. So if you're looking to where do I get these SDS forms, if you go on the Roth Sugar Bush website, and you'll go up on the tabs, I think there's an information tab right up on top. You can download any of the products that we sell, whether it's RO soap, DE powder, defoamer, vacuum pump oils, whatever the case may be. All of the liquids that require an SDS form with them are available on our website. You can download them, print them out, put them in a 3-ring binder, and keep them at your sugar house. It's also a good time of year to update that recall PEP plan or that traceability plan. If you are getting inspected by the state of Wisconsin, they are going to ask you for that recall plan or that traceability plan. Something that I don't have on my list, if you are using a reverse osmosis machine in the state of Wisconsin, you are also going to be required to, if you have a license, to hold a low volume discharge permit through the Wisconsin DNR. So that is another plan that you want to make sure that you have in place if you purchased an RO that will be placed into service for the 2024 season. So just a quick heads up on that. I believe there's still a free permit. I think that the permit is good for, I believe it's 5 years. At least it was when I filled mine out several years ago. And kind of lastly, it's a great time to kind of run down that insurance list, look at any new equipment that I placed into service over the last year, or any new equipment that I'm going to be putting into service prior to the maple syrup season starting. Make sure that we've got the correct insurance coverage on it. If we traded some equipment in, make sure the old equipment was taken off the policy and the new equipment was added. It's always a great time of year to kind of review that coverage information and stuff that we don't necessarily look at on a normal basis, but it's just one of those things that, I know we didn't do it a number of years in our sugar house, and all of a sudden we started looking at our coverages, and it's like, wow, we've been missing the boat here on a few things. So luckily we didn't have a claim on anything. So, but like I say, that's just a good January 1st checklist. if you're a certified organic producer as well, it's a great time to start your paperwork. Traditionally, with organic inspection and organic certification, the timeline is a little slow. So we usually, we're certified organic at our facility. We try to get that paperwork in right away around the first of the year so that we can get an inspection done prior to the production year. So well, that's the majority of my questions. We can surely, entertain any questions as far as that goes. I don't know, Tony, was there any questions?
Yeah, thanks, Jim. We did get a couple of questions in the chat, and I would encourage folks who are on the call to add their questions in the chat now. I also did launch another poll just to get a quick impact results of tonight's presentation, but I want to just first off, thank you again, Jim. You're, obviously a very experienced producer, and then you work with a lot of other producers. So you got, kind of that exponential experience that you get by working with so many different folks across the state. So want to thank you for sharing your insights tonight. And yeah, so I'll just kind of start at the top of the chat and we can work through and go wherever the conversation leads us. So the first question I got for you, Jim, is why does replacing the plastic taps create a higher yield? You had mentioned, I think, a 17% decrease. And what's the mechanism there?
Yeah, so when we drill a tap hole into a maple tree, when we drill that clean cut tap hole, we can actually, extract sterile sucrose from that hole. So the problem that we run into is the minute that we put any device in there, whether it's an old tap, a piece of tubing, whatever comes in contact with that hole, if there's any level of microbial contamination on there, what we do is we trigger the tree's healing process. And that process is called compartmentalization. So what happens if, say, for example, I take a tap that was used for 10 years, I stick it into that tap hole, I set that tap in there, that tap is loaded with microbial contamination, and we trigger that tree's healing mechanism. So what happens during the process of compartmentalization is all the cells that are exposed to that tap hole wall themselves off, and they will no longer conduct sap. So what happens is this tree is trying to heal itself, so it's closing off the cells that actually give us the run of sap. So as the season goes on and that microbial contamination is growing, that tree is aggressively trying to heal itself, and therefore we start to see our yield decrease because of that. So what we're doing is, by putting a clean tap into a clean tap hole, we're not triggering that tree to heal itself, and it's going to run more sap because the cells haven't started walling themselves off yet.
Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think it kind of follows with the general theme that sanitation is just so important through all parts of the maple harvesting process. And Teresa Barone from the Wisconsin Maple Syrup Producers Association joined us in the spring to kind of talk about the end of season cleanup. And I think in getting ready to kind of one of the big themes, as you mentioned, Jim, is just sanitation, keeping everything clean, whether it's from the tap to the drill to, every part of the.
Well, I'm gonna hold you up there though.
Yeah.
So we want to make sure we keep the sanitizers out of the tap hole though. Okay, so let's keep the sanitizers off the drill. Let's keep the sanitizers out of the tap hole. So I am a product of the 70s, unfortunately. So as a kid, I started out using sap flow tap hole pellets, which were paraformaldehyde. And when we put that sanitizer into that tap hole, we interrupt that healing process. So what happens when we interrupt that healing process is that stain or that internal wound inside of that tree grows dramatically larger than what it was, grows dramatically faster and larger than what it was or what it would be if we did not use any sanitizer there. And we're going to go through that in February. We've got some cutaways of some trees that show that sanitizer being used inside that tap hole and the effect that it had on the stain column. So that's something we can revisit. So
yeah, no, that's a really good point, and I think a good advertisement for the February Maple Hour and just kind of all the intricacies of that. The next question that we've got is, so we've got a participant here who's got about 1,000 taps that they do on bags. Last year, they lost about a quarter of those, 250 bags in the first week of a good run from squirrels. Any insights on reducing the squirrel loss for bags? And
remove the squirrels. Unfortunately, when it comes to maple syrup production, squirrels don't work well with us. We have live traps out pretty much year round, and we relocate them or get rid of them. They're they chew you out of house and home, especially on bag holders. All it takes is one nick on the corner, and the bag is empty. So yeah, really your only option is to really, go to aluminum buckets or, reduce the squirrel population. And I guess I hate washing buckets, so I would reduce my squirrel population. So
Is there any validity to some of the sprays? There's deterrents for deer on
yeah,
vegetation.
the
What's your thought?
problem is cross contamination of those products into your sap. Because what we're doing is we're coating the bottom of that bag with, and I've seen everything be used from Tabasco sauce to jalapeno sauce and whatever the case may be to get the animals to quit from chewing on the bags. And the problem is excuse me, is we're handling that bag, and that material is getting all over our glove and everything else, and it's eventually getting into our sap. So we really want to try and keep that material, off the bags, like say, try to keep any of that cross contamination from happening out of the wood lot. So
Okay. Yeah, that's a good point. Next question here's from Brian, asking about using nailers to set the main line. Will they pull out of a tree if a tree falls on the main line? And will nailers ever leak sap or vacuum through a tree?
So nailers won't necessarily leak vacuum through the tree, unless they're put in, 3 days before you're tapping, then you might possibly have that. But basically, the minute that nail's put into that tree is walling those cells off and creating that stain streak, so we won't see that transfer. Nailers typically will not pull off the tree. The whole idea of a nailer is when the nailer is put on a 30 penny nail driven into the tree, we run the wire on the bottom side of the nail so that when a tree falls across the main line, it rips the plastic pipe off the nail and does not break the wire. So that really is the key, or why we use nailers, is we have that breakaway effect for that line. So if a large tree does cross it, instead of snapping that mainline wire, we rip that pipe off that nail, and we have less repairs. A lot of times too with nailers, if you get after them and you drive, if that nail has been in that tree for 5-6 years, a lot of times, that's why we use 30 pennies. We use the big smooth shank 30 pennies. They're a real heavy duty nail. You get on those nails and you drive them in a little bit more with the hammer and break them free, and then you can usually pull that nail back out of that tree if you need to. So
Okay. Next question, is there a difference in yield between the plastic and the stainless steel taps?
as long, a new plastic tap to a sanitized stainless steel tap should not show much of a difference, if any. But the thing is, as long as the stainless steel tap has been sanitized prior to use, you should see results be very similar to each other.
Okay.
Yeah.
Looks like the last question we've got in the chat. And I just encourage anybody else, if you got any last minute questions, to enter them in the chat. We're gonna wrap things up once we're done with the questions. So now's the time to get them in. The question we've got here is around food grade plastic buckets. Cleaning them in the fall, what's the best way to get those sanitized and clean if you're using a food grade plastic?
Yeah, so your food grade plastics is any of your HDPE buckets or your high density polyethylene. Bleach is a good sanitizer for that. That calcium hypochlorite is the bleach that I prefer, because calcium hypochlorite, even if we don't get 100% of it off, it's calcium based. It does not attract the rodents. If you're using a sodium based bleach like sodium hypochlorite, the bad thing is with that is that material salts out when it dries, and then we really worry about rodents. The nice thing is with the bleaches, if it's an unscented bleach, we really don't transfer a lot of flavors. Try to avoid soaps and any detergents like that have any added scents to them. So
Okay. Got another question just came in. You had mentioned using aluminum buckets. Is there anything wrong with drilling holes in the side of a food grade bucket and hanging them on the taps with shark fin tab design. Will plastic buckets not hold up to the weight?
Plastic buckets will hold up to a certain extent. When they're relatively new, they'll last. As they age and degrade, become more brittle, they will eventually crack. If you're going to drill the hole, make sure you drill the hole underneath the larger reinforcement rings up on top, like where the handle would be, to make sure that we're getting enough meat there so that we don't crack the buckets. If you drill too close to the top, especially with 5-gallon buckets, usually a lot of people, if they're drilling holes in the side of buckets, 2 or 2.5-gallon plastic buckets are typically the bucket of choice. Hanging 4 and 5-gallon buckets is usually a little too much weight. So, yeah. And I will stress this, I can tell you that, used pickle buckets make horrible syrup. So try and buy yourself a new bucket. Repurposing some of this equipment may not necessarily be the best idea. I know pepper buckets don't work very well either. So from a flavor point of view, so just keep that in mind.
Yep. Yeah, that's a good point. We're putting a lot of effort into creating that product, and you don't want to, have that subtle off flavor. The next question we got coming in is if you use the stainless taps when you sanitize them, does that introduce the sanitizer to the tree? And can you sanitize plastic taps?
Yeah. So if you're doing your sanitization correctly with a large enough water intervention on the backside, we don't have any sanitizer residue left. And that is the whole key after that sanitizer, to make sure that we're rinsing that material, whether it's tubing or taps or buckets, making sure that we rinse it with enough hot water, if we have hot water available, or enough water in general, to make sure that we get all that residue of that material off. So.
Okay. Great. We got just one final comment in here about adding some duct tape tabs on the bottom corners, 45-degree angles, give a place to hold the bags while dumping. So just maybe a little reinforcement there that could be going on. But other than that, that's all the questions that we've got in the chat. I want to just, before we end tonight's program, again, just thank Jim for the presentation tonight. I know I got my to-do list ready to go, and I'm ready to get out in the woods. I think, as you mentioned, this kind of a little bit of a warm spell we have here this week is a great opportunity to get out and get some of those last minute things done if we haven't already. And then I wanted to just plug some of the upcoming events. So as Jim mentioned, he's going to be at the Winter Institute for the Wisconsin Maple Syrup Producers Association, and the extension program is going to be there as well. And I think anybody who's interested in kind of taking their maple syrup knowledge to the next level would be, well suited by going to that event. And then also the maple hours that we got coming up. So February 15th, that's going to be right before, a lot of the, smaller producers and folks are getting out there and really starting to tap their trees. And I think it'll be a great opportunity to go through some of those best practices just in time before the season, to make sure that you're, following through on the best ways to tap your trees for maple syrup production, as well as the long-term sustainability and health of your trees. And then just a final plug there for the March 13th invasive plants in the sugar bush maple hour. I'll just do one quick final check of the chat, and it looks like we've got everything there, Jim. So I will say thanks to the audience for tuning in, and thanks again to you. And if you got anything else to share with our audience, I'll give you the floor to close out the night.
Well, it was a pleasure to be with you guys this evening. Sure appreciate it. And we look forward to seeing you in February.
All right. Thank you, Jim. Take care, everybody. And we'll see you for the next edition of the Maple Hour.